You can't just walk onto the dock, old man." The voice was a blade, sharp and young, slicing through the salt-laced air of the naval yard. It belonged to Lieutenant Junior Grade Harrison Thorne, a man whose uniform was so crisp it looked like it could cut glass, whose arrogance was as polished as the chrome finish on the latest missile destroyer bobbing lazily in the emerald water. Thorne stood ramrod straight, a sentinel of bureaucratic efficiency, his eyes narrowed at the figure before him. The morning sun, a burgeoning ember in the eastern sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the expanse of concrete, illuminating the stark contrast between the two men. It was a cathedral of modern firepower, steel and polymer, against the quiet, unyielding dignity of old wood and worn canvas. This was the San Diego Naval Base, a bastion of the new, where tradition often found itself sidelined by protocol and the relentless march of technological superiority. The figure in question was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a formidable presence. He was simply an old man. His movements, as slow and deliberate as a glacier's crawl, suggested the heavy toll of decades. His jacket, a faded olive drab, bore the subtle, almost invisible creases of a life lived, not merely endured. It hung loosely on his frame, a testament to time's relentless erosion. His face, a roadmap of a life lived long and hard, was etched with the wisdom of silent battles and quiet victories. He wore no insignia, no flashy medals, nothing that would immediately scream hero to the casual observer. He was, to Thorne, just another impediment, another cog in the vast, inefficient machinery of the world that required his vigilant supervision. Thorne's internal monologue was a symphony of self-importance. These old-timers, he mused, they thought they owned the place. They thought their stories, their fated glory, granted them special dispensation. But regulations were regulations. His duty was clear. He was a guardian of order, a shield against chaos, especially the chaos brought by sentimental notions. His upward trajectory, he knew, depended on a meticulous adherence to procedure, an unwavering commitment to the rules. No exceptions. Especially not for an elderly man with a worn jacket and a gaze that seemed to hold the weight of forgotten oceans. The old man, his name was Miller, did not flinch under Thorne's accusatory stare. He merely paused, his gaze sweeping over the sleek, gray behemoth of the destroyer, a silent admiration in his eyes. He inhaled deeply, the briny scent of the Pacific filling his lungs, a scent that carried with it the faint, almost imperceptible echo of ancient voyages. The sounds of the dock were a familiar hum, the distant clang of metal, the guttural cries of gulls, the low thrum of a ship's engine. All of it a familiar symphony, one he had known intimately for what felt like a lifetime. Thorne's voice, sharp and insistent, intruded on this quiet moment. "I asked you a question, sir. Do you have clearance to be on this dock?" Thorne's voice, though firm, carried an underlying impatience, a barely concealed contempt. He was tired of repeating himself. He was tired of the slow, deliberate movements of the elderly, the way they seemed to exist outside the frantic pace of modern life. Miller turned his head, his eyes the color of aged parchment meeting Thorne's. They held no malice, no anger, only a profound, almost unsettling calm. "No, son," Miller replied, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. "I do not." His words were not a concession, but a simple statement of fact. No apology, no explanation, just the unvarnished truth. Thorne's jaw tightened. This was precisely the kind of noncompliance that chafed him. The defiance was not in the words, but in the utter lack of deference, the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from the old man. "Then I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave," Thorne announced, his voice now imbued with an official, unyielding authority. "This is a restricted area. Unauthorized personnel are not permitted." He gestured vaguely towards the exit, his hand moving with a practiced, almost robotic precision. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the escalating tension. Dock workers, their faces grimed with grease and sweat, paused in their tasks. A few junior officers, fresh-faced and eager, watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Among them was a young petty officer, a veteran of recent conflicts, who leaned against a cargo container, his arms crossed, observing the unfolding drama with a growing sense of unease. He had seen that look before, that quiet dignity in the face of perceived disrespect. "I understand, son," Miller said, his gaze returning to the imposing steel hull of the destroyer. His tone remained even, unhurried. "But I just wanted to see her, one last time." His voice was tinged with a faint, almost imperceptible melancholy, a hint of unspoken history. Thorne scoffed, a short, dismissive sound that was barely audible above the ambient noise of the dock. "See her? This isn't a museum, old man. This is a functional warship. You think you're entitled to a tour because you once served?" He smirked, a flicker of amusement dancing in his eyes. He had him now. The familiar playbook of the past, the plea for special treatment. He had dealt with it countless times. "I served, yes," Miller confirmed, his eyes still fixed on the ship, as if communing with its very essence. He did not elaborate. He did not offer details. He offered only the bare, unadorned truth, which, in Thorne's world, was never enough. Thorne's chest puffed out, his sense of self-importance swelling with each passing second. He was in charge. He was upholding the rules. He was demonstrating his authority. This was a valuable lesson for all who watched. "Look, I don't care if you stormed Iwo Jima with a toothpick," Thorne declared, his voice rising, betraying a crack in his polished composure. "Rules are rules. Now, either you turn around and leave, or I'll have to escort you off the premises. And that won't be pleasant for either of us." He took a step forward, closing the distance between them, his posture radiating a confident, almost aggressive stance. The scent of new polyester and starch filled the air around him, a stark contrast to the faint, earthy smell that clung to Miller's old jacket. Miller slowly reached into his pocket. His movements were slow, deliberate, each motion measured and precise. Thorne's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion in their depths. What was the old man doing? Was he reaching for identification? A weapon? Thorne unconsciously tensed, his hand hovering near his sidearm, a gesture of preparedness, of control. Miller pulled out a small, tarnished brass compass. It was old, its surface worn smooth by countless hands, its glass cover clouded with age. He held it in his palm, his thumb tracing the faint engravings on its back. The metal felt cool against his skin, a familiar weight, a tangible link to a distant past. For a fleeting moment, the roar of a distant engine, the acrid smell of burning oil, the frantic cries of desperate men flickered across his mind's eye. The compass was not merely an object, it was a conduit, a vessel for memory. He held it up, not to Thorne, but to the ship, as if the compass itself was paying homage. Thorne let out an exasperated sigh, a theatrical display of his dwindling patience. "What is that supposed to be, a prop?" he scoffed. "Are you trying to impress me with an antique? I have a GPS on my phone, old man. Now, put that away, and let's go. I'm not asking again." His voice was sharp, his tone laced with a distinct warning. The small crowd, now noticeably larger, watched intently, a silent chorus awaiting the next act. Miller, seemingly oblivious to Thorne's mounting frustration, continued to hold the compass. His eyes, though fixed on the ship, held a faraway look, a deep melancholy. He ran his finger over a small, almost invisible indentation on the compass's brass casing. A sudden, sharp image flashed in his mind. The searing heat of a jungle. The suffocating humidity. The guttural snarl of an unseen enemy. The frantic scramble for cover. He could almost feel the sweat stinging his eyes, the taste of fear in his mouth. The compass, a silent witness, had been there. It had guided him through the impenetrable darkness. This fleeting memory, invisible to the onlookers, passed as quickly as it came, leaving only a faint echo in Miller's serene expression. "I'm going to need to ask you to hand that over, sir," Thorne announced, his voice now dangerously low. "And then I'm going to have to ask you to accompany me to security." His patience had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. This was no longer a simple matter of protocol. It was a challenge to his authority, a blatant disregard for his position. He reached out a hand, intending to seize the compass. It was a calculated risk, a final act of enforcement. The line had been crossed. The point of no return had been reached. The petty officer, the younger veteran who had been watching, shifted uncomfortably. He had observed the entire exchange, his unease growing with each condescending remark from Lieutenant Thorne. He had seen the quiet dignity in the old man's eyes, the unyielding calm that belied his frail appearance. Something about this situation felt profoundly wrong. He noticed the way Miller's hand, though gnarled with age, held the compass with a delicate reverence, almost a sacred grip. He also noticed something else, something subtle that the arrogant lieutenant had completely missed. A faint, almost imperceptible gleam, a dull shimmer beneath the sleeve of Miller's faded jacket. It was a specific kind of patch, sewn with thread of a particular color, stitched with a unique pattern that spoke of a history few understood. Without hesitation, the petty officer pulled out his phone, his movements discreet, almost practiced. He had a contact, a former commanding officer, now a high-ranking admiral in the Pacific Fleet. He typed a quick, terse message, detailing the situation, adding a single, crucial detail: the old man's worn jacket and the glimpse of the faint, faded patch. The message was sent, a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of naval communications, carrying with it the potential for a tsunami of consequences. He knew that the Admiral, a man who valued honor and respect above all else, would not take kindly to a veteran being publicly humiliated. He knew that the clock was ticking, a race against time to prevent a grave injustice. Just as Thorne's fingers brushed against Miller's, a deafening roar ripped through the air. It was the unmistakable thrum of military helicopters, not one, but a formation of 3, descending rapidly towards the base. Their arrival was swift and overwhelming, instantly silencing the mundane sounds of the dock. The wind generated by their rotors whipped through the air, sending papers scattering and causing Thorne's perfectly coiffed hair to stand on end. All focus shifted, every head swiveling upwards to track the impressive descent of the machines. The helicopters landed with practiced precision on a designated helipad a few hundred yards away, their rotors slowly winding down with a deep, resonating hum. From the lead helicopter emerged a figure, tall and imposing, resplendent in a full admiral's uniform. His movements were fluid, powerful, radiating an aura of command. He was flanked by 2 impeccably dressed Marine honor guards, their presence adding to the palpable sense of gravitas. The Admiral, his face set in a grim expression, strode purposefully towards the dock, his eyes scanning the scene. Lieutenant Junior Grade Harrison Thorne, still reeling from the sudden spectacle, instinctively snapped to attention, his hand flying to his brow in a salute. "Admiral, sir," he stammered, his voice suddenly losing its authoritative edge, replaced by a nervous tremor. His face, which had been contorted in a sneer of condescension moments before, was now a mask of bewildered respect. The Admiral, however, did not acknowledge Thorne. He walked past him as if the young lieutenant were invisible, his gaze fixed on a single point in the crowd. His eyes, sharp and discerning, had already located the elderly man with the faded olive-drab jacket. The snub was absolute, a powerful demonstration of the Admiral's singular focus. A silent yet devastating dismissal of Thorne's presence. The assembled crowd watched in stunned silence, a collective gasp echoing through the air. The Admiral approached Miller, his stride unwavering. He stopped directly in front of the old man, his eyes, which had held a grim resolve, now softened with a profound respect. He brought his hand to his brow, delivering a sharp, crisp salute, a gesture of profound honor. "Sir," the Admiral intoned, his voice deep and resonant, a voice accustomed to command, yet now imbued with a deference that sent shivers down the spines of the onlookers. "Admiral Thomas Redding, it is an honor. Captain Miller?" The name hung in the air, a bell tolling in the silence, its reverberations echoing across the dock. Captain Miller. Not just an old man, not just a veteran, a captain, a legend. The petty officer who had made the call nodded almost imperceptibly, a quiet satisfaction spreading across his face. Thorne, however, stood frozen, his salute still rigidly in place, his face drained of all color, his arrogant facade crumbling like ancient masonry. The world, as he knew it, had just been irrevocably altered. Admiral Redding turned his gaze to the stunned crowd, his eyes sweeping over them, finally resting on the petrified Thorne. "This," the Admiral declared, his voice resonating with a controlled power, "is Captain Elias Miller. Some of you may know him by his call sign, the Silent Wraith. Others may know him as the architect of Operation Sea Serpent, the man who single-handedly navigated his destroyer through a minefield the size of Rhode Island during the Korean War, saving an entire fleet. He did it with a broken compass and a sheer force of will that defied all logic." The Admiral paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. The crowd, now a silent testament to the raw power of truth, listened intently. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross, and 3 Silver Stars. He received a personal commendation from President Eisenhower. He is, by every metric, one of the greatest naval heroes this nation has ever produced. As the Admiral spoke, one of the Marine Honor Guards stepped forward, holding aloft a framed shadow box. Inside, nestled on a velvet cushion, was a tarnished brass compass. It was identical to the one Miller still held in his hand, though this one bore a small engraved plate beneath it. Awarded to Captain Elias Miller for unwavering courage and extraordinary navigation during Operation Sea Serpent, Korean War. The physical proof, undeniable and stark, rendered Thorne's earlier scoffing comments a cruel and foolish mockery. The proof was there, tangible and irrefutable. Admiral Redding's gaze snapped back to Thorne, his eyes hardening, becoming 2 points of cold steel. "Lieutenant Junior Grade Thorne," the Admiral began, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "your understanding of naval protocol is clearly as underdeveloped as your sense of respect. You have just publicly humiliated a man who has given more to this country than you could ever hope to comprehend. You judged him by his age, by his clothes, by his quiet demeanor. You saw only an inconvenience where you should have seen a living legend." The Admiral paused, his voice rising once more, imbued with a searing contempt. "You are a disgrace to that uniform, Lieutenant. You have forgotten the very foundation upon which this Navy was built: honor, courage, and commitment, and above all, respect for those who came before us, those who paved the way for the very privileges you so carelessly abuse." The rebuke was thorough, devastating, and utterly public. Thorne stood there, a statue of shame, unable to meet the Admiral's gaze. Miller, sensing the young officer's utter degradation, finally spoke. His voice, though quiet, cut through the tension with a gentle authority. "He's young, Admiral," Miller said, his eyes still holding that profound, unsettling calm. "He was just doing his job. He didn't know." His words were a balm, a quiet act of mercy, a final lesson on humility and forgiveness. He defended the very man who had sought to demean him, demonstrating a grace that was as profound as his courage. As Miller spoke, The memory of that fateful night in Korea, the genesis of the compass in his hand, surged forward with a new clarity, a vivid tapestry woven from the threads of time. The destroyer, the USS Vanguard, had been caught in a sudden, violent storm, pushed perilously close to an uncharted minefield. The radar was out, the navigation systems crippled. Panic had begun to spread through the crew. But Miller, then a young captain, had remained calm. He had pulled out his old brass compass, the one his father, a merchant marine, had given him. Relying solely on the compass, the stars, and his uncanny intuition, he had guided the massive ship through the churning, mine-infested waters. He had steered the Vanguard through an impossible labyrinth, the small brass compass his only guide, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. The faint indentation on the compass was where a piece of shrapnel had struck, narrowly missing his hand, a testament to the chaos he had navigated. He had done it not for glory, not for medals, but because it was his duty, because the lives of his crew, the fate of his ship, depended on it. Lieutenant Thorne was not fired. Captain Miller, in his quiet compassion, intervened, suggesting that the young officer be given a chance to learn from his egregious error. Instead, Thorne was demoted, reassigned to a remote administrative post, far from the polished chrome and bustling docks he so eagerly patrolled. His trajectory, once so promising, had been irrevocably altered by a moment of arrogance and a lack of respect. The incident, however, did not go unnoticed at the highest echelons of the Navy. Within weeks, a new mandatory training protocol was implemented across all naval bases. The Miller Protocol, a comprehensive program focused on the importance of respectful engagement with all personnel, especially veterans, and a stark reminder that true authority stemmed not from rank, but from character and experience. Months later, a chance encounter occurred. Thorne, his uniform now less crisp, his demeanor considerably subdued, was sorting through cargo manifests at a desolate outpost on a small remote island. He looked up to see a familiar figure walking slowly along the pier. It was Miller. The old man, looking no less serene, was simply enjoying the quiet solitude of the setting sun. Their eyes met. Thorne, without a moment's hesitation, snapped to attention, his hand rising in a genuine, heartfelt salute. Miller merely offered a small, almost imperceptible nod of forgiveness, a silent acknowledgment of the young man's humbled respect. Then he continued his walk, disappearing into the fading light, a silent wraith fading into the twilight. The greatest strength is not always found in the loudest voice nor the most impressive uniform. It often resides in the quiet dignity of those who have seen the most, endured the most, and carry the weight of history with unyielding grace. True honor is not bestowed, it is earned through sacrifice and humility. And true respect, like the tides, inevitably finds its way back to its source. If you were moved by Captain Miller's story, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to Channel Name for more stories that remind us of the quiet heroes among us.